now going to discuss the example of cancer. So Naomi is a senior epidemiologist from UK Biobank with a number of different hats, but particularly has been looking at follow-up on cancer.
Thanks, Rory. So I'm going to just give you a very brief update on where we are with linkages to cancer outcomes on behalf of the Cancer Outcomes Working Group. So unlike dementia and mental health that we've just heard about, we're lucky in this country in that we have national cancer registries. So whenever someone is diagnosed with cancer, there's that information is sent to a national register, and information on the type of cancer and when you were diagnosed. That information is all available for research purposes. So, as Kathy mentioned, we have national linkages to both death and cancer registries through flagging. And for England and Wales, we obtain information on cancer registrations through the Office of National Statistics, and that comes through the Information Centre. And that data goes right back to 1971, and we have currently, that's publicly available in the database, we have complete follow-up for cancer registrations up until the end of June for 2014. For Scotland, we obtain information from the National Cancer Registry from the Information Services Division, and that data goes back even further, way back to the late 1950s. So we have information on cancer diagnosis both before people were recruited into the study and afterwards, and again with complete follow-up until the end of June 2014. So what type of information do we obtain on participants? Well, we get information on the ICD codes, so that's the type of cancer that people were diagnosed with, the date of the cancer diagnosis, and also information on the histology and morphology. So that's information on the type of cell from which the cancer originated, and also the behavior of the tumour. We're also about to receive some enhanced cancer data, or more detailed data, on cancer outcomes from the National Cancer Intelligence Network for England and equivalent agencies in Scotland and Wales. And that will give us information on stage and grade of tumours, on the tumour size, on the different types of treatment for cancers, and also for breast cancer we'll also have information on receptor status and laterality. And we're hoping that this data will be available to researchers for use by the end of this year or early next year. Okay, so what we have in the that's publicly available now is these are the most common top 10 incident cancers. So that's cancers that have been diagnosed in participants after they were recruited into the study. And you can see that we've got just over 4,000 new cases of prostate cancer, almost an equivalent number of female breast cancers, over 2,000 colorectal cancers, over 1,000 cancers of the lymph and hematopoietic system, and so on and so on. So you can see that already up until the middle of 2014, we already have thousands of incident cancer cases for at least the most common outcomes. And in a few years' time, we'll also have incident cancers on less common cancer outcomes as well for research purposes. So I just wanted to show you this slide to give you a bit of context about the cancer rates in UK Biobank. So the first thing you can see is cancer rates tend to be a little bit higher in men than women. And that's due to differences in lifestyle risk factors between men and women. But what I want to really draw your attention to is you can see that the rates, this is total cancer rates, in UK Biobank, which is the red dotted line, are a little bit lower than overall cancer rates in the general population, which is the blue line. And that's to be expected because as a whole, the UK Biobank cohort are generally more health conscious and have more health-seeking behaviour than the national population. So, for example, they're less likely to be current smokers, they're less likely to be overweight and obese, and so on. But nonetheless, because we have very large numbers of participants across the full distribution of risk factors, any associations that are made by researchers into risk factors for cancer or any outcome are nonetheless generalizable to the population at large. Okay, so what are researchers interested in UK Biobank? So the type of, we get thousands of applications so far to use the UK Biobank resource. And for the cancer research community, what's been of intense interest is the role of body fat in relation to cancer. So we all know that overweight and obesity is an important risk factor for many types of cancers. But what we don't know is how differences in body fat distribution, what Jimmy Bell was talking about earlier this morning from the imaging scans, how measures of internal body fat can predict cancer risk. So there's a real excitement in the cancer research community looking at the imaging measures in relation to body fat and future cancer risk. Also, many researchers are interested in the biomarkers that we're measuring on the full 500,000 participants. So we're measuring some biomarkers that are of great interest to cancer research, like sex hormones, IGF-1, vitamin D, and so on. So there's a lot of interest in looking at how circulating levels of these biomarkers may go on to influence subsequent cancer risk. There's also a lot of research interest in looking at generating risk prediction scores that include both genetic data and lifestyle information to look at how a combination of these factors can help to predict subsequent cancer risk. And of course, once you know that information, that can then go on to develop systems as to how you can help prevent those cancers occurring in the first place. Also, lots of interest in doing research to look at gene-environment interactions in relation to cancer. So this is how you might want to look at how different lifestyle factors influence the risk of developing cancer, depending on whether or not an individual's got a genetic predisposition to the disease. And also research interest in looking at those group of participants who already have cancer at baseline and looking at both genetic and lifestyle factors as well as treatment that can determine cancer survival. So a huge amount of research interest in cancer research in the study. So I just want to touch briefly, finally, on the issue of tumour collection, which I know we've talked a little bit about this morning in the participants panel. So the first question is really, why should we bother? We've already have arguably a lot of information on cancer diagnoses in UK Biobank participants. And what can information from collecting a little bit of biopsy material, what do we gain from that over and above what we already have? Well, the first thing is it will help us to confirm the diagnosis, so you will get a good idea of the histology and morphology of the tumour. But perhaps most importantly, it will enable researchers to look at the molecular subclassification of disease based on the specific genetic profile of the tumours. So you'll be able to classify different types of tumours that may all have the same ICD code. For example, they may all be ovarian cancer, but they'll have very different genetic signatures based on the types of mutations that occurred. And you can only do that type of molecular subclassification if you actually have the tissue itself. So once you have an understanding of the molecular type of cancer that you're dealing with, you can then start to do research to try and understand the mechanisms of how these different types of cancer develop, what are the risk factors, and how those cancers progress into more aggressive forms. And that then leads to improved methods for looking at cancer detection and ultimately treatments. So, what's the feasibility of collecting tumour tissues for the thousands of UK Biobank participants that will go on to develop cancer in the future? Well, we've done a little bit of pilot study so far in collaboration with the University of Newcastle with Professor Andy Hall. Apologies for the green ticks, they've somewhat moved in the slides. So the first thing to say is this pilot study, what we've been able to show is it's possible to link UK Biobank participants to hospital pathology databases. And it's also possible, in theory, to obtain a full electronic copy of the histopathology report. And that will contain details for researchers on things like the type of specimen that was collected, how much was collected, and the macroscopic and microscopic description of the tumour. So that will be able to give researchers a good idea of what types of material are available for research purposes. So where does that leave us? What are the next steps? What would we like to do? Well, there's quite a lot of future work for us to do. First of all, what we'd really like to do is to find out from the participants themselves what are their attitudes on us collecting tissue samples. So although tissue samples are considered part of the medical record, and therefore we in theory have consent to collect tumour tissues on UK Biobank participants, it's quite likely that the vast majority of participants don't realise that they've consented to the collection of their tumour tissue. So we quite like to, before we embark on this, to have a feel for participants' attitudes on collecting tumour tissue, not just tumour tissue, but other forms of tissue as well. We then want to determine what types of specimens and for what cancer types will be most informative for research purposes. And then we can think about establishing a mechanism that we can then roll out across the country to retrieve pathology reports, pathology slides, and the actual tissue specimens themselves from at least the largest NHS trust for which UK Biobank participants attend. And that pilot information will inform our strategy as to how we go, if and how and when we go and retrieve specimens for specific research projects. But I think overall it's something that's of great interest to the cancer research community as a whole, and will add a whole new depth to the data that we already possess. That's it.